Hi Les, welcome and welcome to the listeners. Another episode of Be Bold in Business. Today we're talking to Les Probert. Les, welcome to the show.
Yeah. Thanks, mate. I'm delighted to be here and talking to you and your listeners today.
That's right. So it's about being bold in business and loving your business. Just for anybody who doesn't know, Les, he's a consultant with Toho in Auckland. They're tourism and hospitality specialists, consultants, coaches, and mentors. Quite a mouthful, isn't it, Les?
Well, it is, but we do quite a lot of stuff, Darry. So.
That's right, all sorts. And you have some other business called Epromotionz and some other, into the digital marketing. When the internet didn't even know it existed, correct?
That's right. Yeah, no, I've always liked the online world. In fact, I started one of the first web development companies in New Zealand.
Yes. Okay. So there's the original versions. So anybody who wants to get some advice on that side of thing, we know where to find Les. So I met Les we met about 10 years ago, maybe. So we were part of a bigger consulting network at the time.
Time goes fast when you're having fun, Dowie.
Yeah. I remember standing on the podium there to get some sort of award. And in this speech, I said, I was talking about my passion. And one of my passions is my startup travel bits. And I remember talking to you at lunch at the time where you said, hey, you do know that I used to run Thomas Cook in Australasia. And I said, Les, do you believe in coincidences? And you said, what did you say?
Yeah, no, very much so. I mean, I think that the world is full of synchronicity. And I think that was a really good example of us just having to have a conversation on a day that's led to a long and happy friendship.
Yeah, that's correct. So friends and colleagues, and it's been really appreciated over the last the time that we've been in touch. So I thought you'd be a logical candidate, right? And there's another couple of surprise elements later that we will bring up. But just maybe could you sort of fill us in a little bit in, on your background, who you are, what you do.
Sure.
There's plenty of years of experience there to talk to.
Sure. Well, a little bit like you, I've been in business a long time. My career has basically been revolved around sales and marketing, and sort of past corporate roles have included being sales manager for Probert, the pens and lighters company. I ran a tour. I got into travel in the UK. I ran coach tours around Europe for a number of years for young people. And and that was great fun. We went all over the world doing that. And I set up offices for Vikings all over the world, New York, South Africa, Australia, things like that. Eventually came back to New Zealand when I had a family and joined Thomas Cook, and had 16 very happy years with Thomas Cook in a variety of different roles in Australia and New Zealand before starting my own travel business that became quite a large tour wholesaling business. And I sold that business to a public company 15 years ago now. But I've started 16 different businesses of my own. Some have been very successful and some have been absolute dogs. So, and now I consult, so I can sort of speak from experience on what not to do as much as what to do.
That's right. But you never lost the enthusiasm, right?
Oh no, I love business. I think it was Lord Beaverbrook said that business is the most fun you can have with your clothes on. And I think that's a pretty good way of looking at business.
That's right. That's right. So has it always been plain sailing? You obviously said not always. Yes. What would you say be some of the highlights either way?
Well, some of the highlights. Well, there's been a lot of highlights over the years, and a lot of it is about growing businesses and making them successful. In particular, my travel business turned out to be very, very successful, and sold it for a lot of money to a public company, and that was a real highlight. I had great people who I worked with, really enjoyed the business, and it was just such a fascinating world to live in. And I think if you work in something you love, like love your business, you never work. Every day is a pleasure. And I can honestly say in my career, while there's been some shit times and some down times, generally it's been great fun, and I've really, really enjoyed being in business. And now, over the last 10 years, I've worked with other people, helping them with coaching and mentoring and things like that, as you and I work together. And that's immensely satisfying, then helping other people become successful. So, yeah, it's been good.
That's right. That's why we do what we do, I suppose. Yeah.
Exactly. That's where the satisfaction comes.
Yeah, that's correct. In terms of when things are not going so well, yeah, it's always great when sailing is good. But if it's not happening, we're big on the mindset, and I know you are, right? Awareness, self-awareness type work and so on. So I just wondering if you could give us some insights in how you approach that, either personally or, with your clients.
Well, both ways. I teach people the way I think about business and things like that. And yes, there have been some terrible times during the GFC, for instance. One of my businesses, I got in terrible problems. But I think, one of the mantras that I learned many years ago that I work by is a simple thing that lives on my desk to this day. And it says, if it's to be, it's up to me. In other words, it's about taking personal responsibility and doing what you say you're going to do, when you're going to say that you're going to do it, helped by other people, but really the buck at the end of the day stops with you if you're in business. And I really do believe that's the way. And the other thing from a mental point of view is, I'm a big follower of John Kehoe, the guy who wrote Mind Power.
Yeah.
And he believes that we live in two different worlds. We live in an inner world and an outer world. And this is, when you master this, it really, really helps tremendously. And the inner world is the way you think about things, and the outer world is everything that happens to you. So let me give you a real life example. Before I did John's course, one of my little personal things is I hate being late. And, I live in Auckland and the traffic's terrible, and I'd have an appointment, I'd be late to the appointment, I'd get all wound up being late in the traffic. Well, that's the outer world, right? What I realized is that I was thinking about it the wrong way. The inner world, which I can't do anything about the outer world, which is the shit traffic, but I can do something about the way I think about it. So I can pick up my phone, I can call the client and say, look, I'm terribly sorry, I'm caught up in traffic and I'm going to be late. Problem goes away. So it's about how you think about things. And while it's very easy to be positive and happy when things are going right, it's a heck of a lot harder when things aren't going so well.
Yeah, so you're talking about being able to separate those things from each other, and being able to take a bit more of an objective view, I suppose.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. To step back and try and look at things in a different sort of way, and try and take some of the emotion out of it, which is hard to do.
We think we found the answer to all of that, Les, but
absolutely. Absolutely.
We think so.
Because, you're right, because it is a process. You can teach people how to do that, but it's not something we're normally taught in schools. It's not something we're taught in the educational system, and often for many of us, it's just through experience and going through some bad things to learn from them. And
why do you think that is, entrepreneurialism or business skills hardly touched on in the curriculum?
No, it's not. But I think people that are entrepreneurial tend to be fairly positive, outgoing sort of people anyway. The successful ones are a little bit like one of those Chinese dolls, those Russian dolls. You hit them, they fall over and they bounce up. They hit them and they fall over and they bounce back up again. And often, if I look around the people I've worked with, some of the most successful people I've known, before they've got their success, have had some terrible failures. And, in many cases, some of them would have walked away from it. But I've had some wonderful mentors over the years. And I really believe that coaching and mentoring can really help people, and finding the right sort of person to help you. And one of my bosses many years ago, he was a South African when I was with Vikings in London, and he was tremendously helpful to me. And he had this saying, I can't do a South African accent, but he used to say to me, Les, you've just got to remember, you've got to throw a lot of shit at the fan to get some of it to stick. But he said, the trick is just to keep throwing it, because it comes back at you. And most people give up when it comes back at you. And it's very, very true. It's quite a vivid sort of way of looking at life.
I remember, and this pops into my mind, a management example you mentioned. It's totally related though, right?
Yes.
And in terms of empowering staff, where you said, hey, people are coming into your office. Yes. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yes, I do. And
how to address that? I thought it was a marvelous example of empowered management.
Well, that was something I learned, and it was quite a funny story actually that I the way I learned it. So if you'll indulge me for a minute, I'll tell you the story. But I had my first real management job, and I ran the wholesale division of Thomas Cook, and I had 20 odd people working for me. And it was my first real job, and I thought manager job was to make decisions on anything. And I remember many years ago, it was the August school holidays, and we were up at our old batch, and we'd had a week off during the school holidays. This was before the days of cell phones. And we had a landline in the batch. And I said, oh, if there's any problem, just give me a ring. And I was getting rings every 10 minutes answering problems. And my wife started going absolutely ape about it. Then the rain came, and the kids were young, and they were getting really upset. The phone went for about the 10th time in the day. So I pulled it off the wall, gave the kids my toolbox and said, here's the phone, pull it the bit, see how many bits there are. You wouldn't believe how many bits there are on a phone. Kept them amused for most of the afternoon. And so, excuse me, I went over to the local shop where there was a phone booth. And I rang the office and I said, oh, sorry, look, the phone's broken at the house. If anything really important comes up, ring the shop. They'll let me know and I'll call you back on the, from the phone box. And of course, no one rang me. So for the rest of the week, I got no phone calls. I was really panicking. By the end of the week, I thought, oh, I'm going to come back to a total disaster. Everything's going to be really, really wrong. I got back, the business was running perfectly. They'd made the decisions, there was no problem. And it was what I'd call a BFO, a blinding flash of the obvious. I suddenly realised that if you let people make responsibility for decisions, they will decide for themselves. So from that point onwards, and what I've done in all my career, when someone comes to me with a problem, I say, well, what do you think the answer is? Normally they know what the answer is because they're much closer than what you are. And so that sounds a great idea. Why don't you go and do it? If they don't know the answer, what I say to them is, well, why don't you go about and think about a couple of solutions and come back and talk to me, and we'll talk about how we can sort this out. So take the monkey off your shoulders, give it to them. They grow a lot in themselves, and they will come up with the right decision. And 99 times out of 100, they know what the actual answer is, but they just come for you for reassurance. After a while, your team get to the side that you back them, you empower them. They don't come to you for those decisions. They just get on with it. And that's when you start having a really successful business and a really successful team.
That's awesome, Les. I can't say personally I've been too good at that, but in terms of empowered management, that would be one of the classical examples with most people. I'd say 9 out of 10 people would have massive issues with to actually let that happen, right? And how they feel about themselves would also influence how they would address a situation like that, or try to be aware of it even, to be able to let somebody run with something, right?
Sure. And the downside is every now and again they do make a mistake and the wheels fall off, but you have to live with that. That's part of the growth process. And you just have to say to them, excuse me, do a debrief with them and say, well, what did we learn from that? What would you do differently next time? And then that's the way you give people the confidence. It's no good being a boss and giving people that and without backing them. So you have to back them 100%, even when they do stuff wrong. And
that sort of nicely leads us into the next sort of subject. You've written some books and we're going to republish them with Love Your Business, right? And one of these books is called What I Didn't Know, I Didn't Know. Marvelous title. I've tested it on a few people. They really love it. Good. That's almost 50, let's say, tips or short bits of information. Can you give us a bit of a background on that book and why you came to write it in the first place?
Yeah, sure. Well, I started writing it actually, and I read a thing about if I could give myself advice at 20 years old, starting out again, what would I tell myself? And my son was just starting his career. Excuse me, I'm very sorry. I'll have to edit that bit out. He was just starting his career. So I basically wrote the book for him. Of course, he took no notice of it at all, but a lot of my clients found it really good. And really, these are just things I've learned over the years from experience. And they're sort of just practical advice for people in business and in life so that they don't make the same mistakes I made. So that was how it came about, and it's I've had really, really good feedback from it.
That's awesome. And can you mention us a couple of examples, maybe?
Sure. Let me just grab a copy from the book in terms of, and I'll just pick something kind of.
I sort of nicely sprung this on you, didn't I?
something that might be relevant to people.
I mean, for example, one question I'm curious about now. You know, you got a background in travel.
Yes.
Tourism is on his bum, right?
Yes.
A close colleague of yours is dealing very closely with hospitality.
Yes.
Right? What is required for people in those industries, right, to still stay positive, differentiate, finding ways and means of working around these things, pivot, in other words, annoying word, but what is, you know, what is required there? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you know about, you know, your background, you know, it was in the hard sales of travels, yeah. What would you say then? You know, I mean, you've had these conversations with your travel mates, I imagine. Would that be correct?
Oh, absolutely. But boy, you could ask an easy question. That's a real tough one, because really the world has completely changed, and COVID has really tipped the world upside down for people involved in the travel industry. And of course, depending on what area they are in, they can pivot. The domestic market has become a lot stronger. It's really looking at ways and remaining positive and looking at what you can do in the domestic market. That might mean cutting costs in terms of the price people are prepared to pay. Looking at smarter scheduling in terms of staffing and things like that. Doing more stuff online. Looking to create experiences so that people can actually experience perhaps your product online, and things like that. So it really is looking at doing things in a different way, given that you know, we have a lot of talk about the new normal, and I don't see the travel industry coming back to the way it was for a long, long time. In fact, I heard Rob Fife, the ex-CEO of Air New Zealand, on the radio just this afternoon. He was saying he sees it 3 to 5 years. So that's a long time before we are going to see things.
Right. So sorry, I just got you out of the book, but let's get into the book a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, here's a random sort of thing, which is tip 9: concentrate on what normally happens, not the exceptions. Now, so often we look at things, we look at what could go wrong and cater for what could go wrong, rather than looking at what could go right. Far better to say that 90% of the time things are going to go right. So when something goes wrong, let's have a plan for that 10% exceptions, but let's not bake that into the way that we actually operate, and just find a workaround for the exceptions, because particularly when you come to automate systems, you try to automate every possibility. You'll be at it forever. So that's typically a sort of a pragmatic approach to that sort of thing. So it's ideas that's like that. And another one here, tip 6, very relative to what we're talking about here. And an old mentor of mine said, whenever we were making a decision, he used to say, what's the worst that could happen? Now let's look at the worst possible scenario. Could we survive that? If it all turned to total shit, could we get through that? Could we survive that? Once you've got there, everything's upside, and you can walk backwards from the worst that could happen. And often when you actually look at what the worst that could happen, it's actually not as bad as what you actually think it could be. So, you know, it's about really being a glass half full type guy or person, but looking at the downside as well, and being pragmatic about how you approach it.
Yep, totally. Another book that we're gonna get into, is the Small Business Owner's Guide to Succession Planning and Exit.
Right.
It's, I'm starting to feel old already, but I mean, what we're talking about here is the sort of people slightly like my age or a little older, right? Thinking about what shall I do with my business, and it's not necessarily about selling tomorrow, but getting ready for some sort of a program, right? Or bringing somebody in on the business, that type of thing, right?
Absolutely.
So what's the sort of, you know, premise of that book, Les?
Well, the starting point is the day you start a business, I believe you should look at how you're going to sell it. so that you're setting your
Okay.
business and your systems up so that you do have an exit strategy at the end of the day. A lot of the things in that book are actually aimed at baby boomers who over the next 10 years are going to be exiting their business, and it's going to be absolutely massive change of value as they come out of their businesses, sell their businesses, or bring younger people into their businesses. So some of it, but even a young person in business, you really do need to look at how you're going to sell your business. What if someone came and knocked on your door one day and said, I want to buy your business? If you have all your systems, your processes in place, everything documented and things like that, you'll get a much higher value for the business. And so right from the onset, you should set your business up so it's not dependent on you. And many small business owners, particularly people like tradies and things like that, the business is 100% dependent on them. And if they're not there, there is no business. So if you can set up systems and process and document things, you've got something to sell. And, you know, when you come to sell your business, remember that a business normally sells for a multiple of earnings. And the more you can improve the earnings, in other words, don't rape and pillage your own business if you're looking to sell it, so that your earnings are a lot better, because you're going to get, it's much better to get, you know, $3 or $4 in the future rather than taking $1 out of the business today if you're actually going to sell it. So it's really looking at things like that.
Very interesting. I'm always about growing businesses, and you can still do both, can't you? You can still do grooming and growing at the same time, right?
Well, they go hand in hand. Absolutely. And one of the best ways of actually growing a business is to actually have a really good business with great systems, processes, and documentation in place so that you can work on the business and you can grow the business. It might mean that you acquire other businesses, and that's your growth path, because you've got your business running so well with great people behind you, and you've got a succession plan in place, you know, to be able to do that. But one of the things that I think is an important thing to remember when it comes to exiting businesses, many of the people that are going to buy these businesses, the baby boomers, are really carrying a lot of debt, because they're people in their 30s and 40s that might have student loans, big mortgages, expensive kids, and they don't have a lot of free cash. So one of the things is constructing ways for them to buy into the business over a period of time. And there's no reason that a business actually has to be a clean-cut sale. It could be an exit strategy over 3 to 5 years, with the owner continuing to be involved in the business, mentoring the new business and shares coming across. In fact, when I bought my travel business, that's exactly what happened. I bought a 25% shareholding in the business, and over the next 3 years, I obtained the majority shareholding in the business. But the owners have remained involved, helped tremendously with their experience, their contacts and things like that. And it was a great win-win for everyone at the end of the day. And it was a way that I got into a business that I couldn't have afforded to buy outright. So I think there's lots of skillful ways that you can actually package businesses to actually, it's a win for the owner and a win for the buyer.
Yeah, it does take a bit of creativity, right? And marrying up people's objectives in where they want to be in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, right?
Exactly. And you know, if it's not a sale to a trade sale to a big, you know, a bigger company, it normally means that it's selling to another entrepreneur who may not have the cash, the immediate cash available to actually buy the business.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Now, just to wrap it up a little bit, I know we're already summarizing everything in books and things and tips and lists and everything else that we can think of, right? If there was just one thing.
If there was just one thing to remember.
If there's just one thing that you would like to pass on, what would that be?
I think it probably is what I said earlier on. That slogan that's been my mantra. If it's to be, it's up to me. So really, it's me that's got to change. So if I have to change my way of thinking, if I have to change my business approach, if I have to do things differently, I'm going to have to drive that. Certainly surround yourself with the right people. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned in life is never be slow in asking for advice. There's always people out there that are much smarter than what you are, have had more experience than you. And in my experience, if you actually ask them, go up and ask them, they're more than willing to help.
Yeah.
You know? And so find mentors, find people you trust, and surround yourself with positive people. Get the negative people out of your life. That would be the other thing I'd say. Just don't get pulled down by people who don't share your vision.
Well, that's awesome. Thanks, Les, and thank you for the contributions. And everybody, you will be hearing much more about this guy, either directly or indirectly. So thanks so much, and thanks for your wisdom and sharing that with us today.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. I hope it helped.
Yeah, totally.